Clara Hensley had lived in the same small Montana town all her life. It was a quiet place surrounded by golden fields, long stretches of pasture, and the sound of cattle echoing in the distance. The people there were simple and hard-working, but they talked about everything and everyone. And Clara, no matter how kind or humble she tried to be, was always the center of their whispers. From the time she was a teenager, Clara's body had made her the subject of gossip. The women said she drew attention, and the men didn't help, often staring or making comments that left her feeling ashamed and trapped in her own skin. She tried to hide herself behind loose shirts and quiet behavior, but no matter what she did, the town found reasons to talk. Her mother, Martha, a strict but loving woman, often told her, "Keep your head down, Clara. Folks will talk no matter what, so best not to give them a reason." But Clara knew that reason didn't matter. In this town, once people made up their minds, they rarely changed them. Clara worked hard on her family's small farm, rising before sunrise to milk the cows and feed the chickens. Her father had passed away when she was just 17, leaving her and her mother to manage everything on their own. It wasn't easy. Money was tight, and every winter brought new challenges. Still, Clara found peace in the rhythm of her chores, the smell of hay, the warmth of the animals, and the silence of dawn before the town woke up. But outside the farm, peace was harder to find. At the local market, where she sold eggs and milk, people often whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "Such a shame," one woman murmured once. "She could be decent if she didn't look the way she does." Clara pretended not to hear, but her heart sank each time. One Saturday morning, while packing her cart with eggs, she noticed a tall man she didn't recognize standing near the feed stall. He wore a weathered hat, boots dusty from travel, and had the calm eyes of someone who'd seen more than he cared to talk about. That was Eli Turner, the new owner of the Turner Ranch. He had inherited it after his father's passing and was known for keeping to himself. Eli approached Clara's stand quietly. "You sell feed too?" he asked in a steady voice. "No, sir," Clara replied, a bit nervous. "Just eggs and milk. But the Johnsons down the road might have what you need." He nodded, studying her for a moment, not in the way others did, but with a kind of quiet curiosity. "You work your own farm?" "With my mother, yes," she said, surprised anyone cared enough to ask. "Hard work," he replied, tipping his hat. "Most people don't know how much it takes." And just like that, he moved on. No comments, no lingering looks, just a man recognizing another person's effort. It was such a small thing, yet it stayed in Clara's mind for days. A week later, word spread that Eli was looking for help at his ranch. His father's passing had left a lot undone. Fences broken, barns in need of repair, cattle to be tended. Clara hesitated at first, but she needed extra income, and she knew ranch work better than most. Still, she feared what people would say. A single woman working for a bachelor rancher would surely feed the gossip mill. That night, her mother sighed when Clara mentioned it. "You'll only make them talk more," she warned gently. Clara smiled faintly. "They already do, Mama. I might as well earn a living while they're at it." The next morning, Clara rode her horse to the Turner Ranch. The sun was barely up, painting the fields in soft gold. Eli met her near the barn, surprised but not displeased to see her. "You sure you can handle this kind of work?" he asked, testing her more out of habit than doubt. Clara lifted a bale of hay as if to prove her strength. "I've been doing this since I could walk," she said, smiling a little. Eli nodded. "Then let's get to it." Working for Eli turned out to be the first time in years Clara felt respected. He never treated her differently, never made her feel uncomfortable. They spent long hours fixing fences, feeding horses, and moving cattle. Eli was quiet, but his silence was calm, not cold. Sometimes they talked about small things, weather, crops, or their families, and slowly, a quiet friendship began to grow. But not everyone saw it that way. By the end of the first month, the town was buzzing again. Eli Turner's got her out there alone all day. People whispered, "It's improper." "She's using her looks to keep that job," others said. Clara tried not to listen, but the words found their way to her ears, especially on Sundays when she went to church. One morning after service, the preacher's wife stopped her by the door. "Clara, dear," she began in a sweet but sharp tone, "you know people talk. A good woman should be careful not to draw attention to herself." Clara felt her cheeks burn. "I just work hard, ma'am," she replied softly. "Of course," the woman said, smiling thinly, "but sometimes hard work isn't enough to make people forget what they see." Clara walked home with her mother in silence that day, blinking back tears. She had done nothing wrong, yet she felt guilty for simply existing. That evening she sat alone on the porch, staring out at the open fields. The air smelled like rain, and crickets sang in the distance. She thought about leaving, maybe heading to another town where no one knew her name or her story. But then she thought of Eli, of the way he treated her like any other worker, and something in her heart told her to stay. The following week, things grew even harder. A group of local men at the supply store started teasing Eli about hiring her. "You must like the view while you work," one said with a laugh. Eli didn't react at first, but then his voice grew firm. "I hired her because she's the best hand I've got. You boys might learn something from her if you stop talking long enough to work." Clara didn't hear about that moment until later, but when she did, it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. Someone had finally stood up for her, not because they felt sorry for her, but because they respected her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara and Eli worked side by side mending a fence. The sky turned pink and orange, and the air was filled with the soft hum of summer insects. "You ever think of leaving this town?" he asked suddenly. "Sometimes," Clara admitted. "But it's home. I just wish people could see past what they think they know." Eli nodded. "People like to talk when they don't understand something. You can't live for them, Clara." His words were simple, but they stayed with her. Then, one Sunday, the tension reached its peak. During service, the preacher gave a sermon about temptation and a woman's duty to modesty. Though he never said her name, everyone knew who he meant. Clara sat frozen in her pew, staring at the floor, her hands trembling. When the service ended, she left quietly before anyone could speak to her. That afternoon, she didn't return to the ranch. She sat in her room, tears soaking her pillow. For the first time in years, she truly considered leaving for good, packing her things and riding until the gossip faded behind her. But the next morning, as dawn broke, she heard a knock on the door. It was Eli. "Didn't see you yesterday," he said, his tone gentle. "I didn't feel welcome anywhere," she whispered. Eli looked at her for a moment, then said simply, "You belong where your heart tells you to stand. Don't let small minds push you off your own land." Something in his voice gave her strength. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and returned to work that day. The air was crisp, and the wind carried the scent of pine and dust. She felt tired, but for the first time in a long while, she also felt brave. As the day ended and the sun dipped low, Clara stood beside the corral watching the horses graze. The sky stretched wide and endless above her, and she realized she didn't need the town's approval to have worth. All she needed was her courage, and that she already had. Part 1 ends with Clara finding a small spark of strength within herself. She doesn't know it yet, but the days ahead will test that strength in ways she could never imagine. The days after Clara's quiet decision to stay on the ranch felt different. Something inside her had shifted. She still heard the whispers in town, but now they didn't sting the same way. She began to realize that no one could define her life except her. Every morning, she rose before dawn, pulling on her boots and heading to the barn while the world was still half asleep. Eli had noticed the change in her too. She worked harder than ever, her confidence growing with each passing day. When a storm came through that spring, tearing down part of the fence line, Clara was the first to grab a hammer and post. She worked through the rain, her hair plastered to her face, her hands raw but determined. Eli offered to finish the job himself, but she only smiled and said, "If we quit every time it rains, we'd never get anything done." He just nodded, impressed as always by her quiet strength. The people in town still talked, of course, they always did. But sometimes their tone was different now. A few of the older farmers began to admit that Eli's ranch looked better than it had in years, and that Clara seemed to be the reason why. The cattle were strong, the barns clean, the land greener than anyone remembered. Slowly, curiosity began to replace judgment. Then one late summer evening, everything changed. Clara and Eli had finished a long day of work and were locking up the stables when the sharp smell of smoke hit the air. Eli turned quickly, his eyes widening as he saw a dark orange glow rising from the lower fields. "The hay barn," he said, his voice tight. Without a second thought, Clara ran toward the fire. Eli shouted for her to stop, but she didn't listen. The barn was already burning fast, the dry summer heat feeding the flames. Inside, several animals were trapped, 2 horses and a calf that had been kept there overnight. Clara could hear their frightened cries and fear gripped her heart, but she pushed forward anyway. She wrapped a wet cloth over her mouth and rushed inside. The smoke stung her eyes and made it hard to breathe, but she didn't turn back. She managed to open the gate, leading the terrified animals toward the door. One of the horses stumbled, too afraid to move. Clara grabbed its reins, whispering softly, "It's okay, boy, it's okay," until the animal finally followed her out. Eli ran in just as she came stumbling through the smoke, coughing hard. Without a word, he pulled off his coat, wrapped it around her shoulders, and helped her to the ground. Together they worked to throw sand and water on the spreading flames. By the time the fire was out, the barn was half gone, but the animals were safe. When the townsfolk heard about what happened, they were stunned. Some couldn't believe Clara had risked her life for the ranch. Others called her brave. For the first time, the whispers weren't filled with cruelty but with admiration. A few days later, Eli's ranch was the topic of every conversation in town. People came to see the damage, bringing supplies and tools to help rebuild. It was the first time Clara felt truly welcomed by some of the neighbors who used to avoid her. A woman from the church even brought her homemade pie, saying softly, "You did a good thing, dear." Clara didn't know how to respond. She simply smiled and said thank you. Inside, she felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. The warmth of being seen for her heart, not her appearance. Eli, meanwhile, had been thinking deeply about everything that had happened. He knew what people said about them, but he also knew what he saw, a woman of courage, kindness, and determination. A few weeks after the fire, when the ranch was running smoothly again, he decided to do something no one expected. The annual town gathering was held in the square that fall, a tradition that brought everyone together for food, music, and stories. Clara almost didn't go, knowing how uncomfortable large crowds made her, but Eli insisted. "You've earned your place there," he told her. "Don't let them forget it." As evening fell, the townsfolk gathered near the stage, lanterns glowing and children laughing. When it was Eli's turn to speak, a yearly custom for the local ranchers, he stood tall and began to thank the community for helping after the fire. Then, his voice grew steady and clear. "There's someone I need to thank more than anyone else," he said, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "Someone who risked her life to save this ranch and who's done more work here than any man I've ever hired. I'd like you all to know that starting today, Clara Hensley will be the new ranch manager of Turner Ranch." For a moment, there was complete silence. People looked at one another wide-eyed. Clara felt her heart stop. She wanted to disappear, but Eli wasn't done. "She's earned it," he continued calmly. "She's smart, brave, and honest. And if anyone in this town still thinks a person's worth can be measured by gossip, you might want to look at the results of her work before you speak." The crowd stayed quiet for another long moment. Then someone started clapping. It was old Mr. Davis, one of the oldest farmers in town. Then another person joined, and another, until the applause spread across the square. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She had never wanted attention, only respect, and now it was finally given. After that night, things truly began to change. Some people still whispered, but now it was softer, uncertain, as if they weren't sure what to believe anymore. More importantly, others began to follow Clara's example. 2 younger women in town came to her asking for work, saying they admired her strength. She trained them patiently, teaching them how to care for the horses, fix fences, and handle cattle. For the first time, the Turner Ranch had women working, side by side with men, and they were every bit as capable. Eli and Clara's bond deepened too. They shared quiet dinners after long days, talking about their dreams and what the future might hold. There was a peace between them that didn't need words. They respected each other deeply, and that respect slowly grew into something warmer, though neither of them rushed to name it. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Eli found Clara standing by the corral, watching the horses graze. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and gold, and the world felt calm after so many storms. "You know," Eli said softly, leaning on the fence beside her, "you've changed this place." Clara smiled faintly. "No, Eli. I just stopped letting other people change who I am." He looked at her then, his eyes full of quiet admiration. "That's exactly what I mean." The wind carried a soft chill as they stood there side by side, both of them knowing that life had brought them together for a reason. Weeks turned into months, and the Turner Ranch became one of the most respected in the county. People who once mocked now spoke with pride, saying they always knew Clara had it in her, though she smiled quietly, knowing the truth. What mattered wasn't what they said now, but what she had learned about herself. She had learned that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's just the courage to keep going when the world doubts you. One crisp morning, Clara rode out alone across the open fields. The grass sparkled with dew, and the air smelled fresh and sweet. She stopped her horse at the top of a hill, the whole valley stretching out before her, wide, endless, and free. The same land that once felt like a cage now felt like home. She took a deep breath, her heart light and steady. For the first time, she wasn't running from anyone's judgment or hiding from anyone's eyes. She had faced the fire, both real and within herself, and had come out stronger. As the sun rose higher, painting the land in soft light, Clara smiled. She knew there would always be people who talked, always those who didn't understand. But now she also knew something far more important. She didn't need their understanding to have peace. Her worth had never been theirs to decide. And as she rode back toward the ranch, the wind in her hair and the morning stretching before her, Clara Hensley knew she was finally free. Not because the world had changed, but because she had.